So I don't know about you, but I've had a little time, just a little time to myself these past few days. I think a lot of us are in the same boat, and it's been a little strange. All alone with what seems like a ton of time. Oddly enough, with all this time, it's hard for me to focus sometimes on the particular things I need to do. Even sitting down to write this sermon was more of a challenge for me than it normally is, because I'm not in my structured time. So I'm always like, oh, well, there's time to do that. It seemed like I had all the time in the world, but when I needed to focus, I was thinking about all that is happening in the world. That's why I wrote this half an hour before I even started saying it. I'm just kidding. I'm sure I'm not alone in this, though. I am alone in my home. Others of us, though, I understand, are not alone in the home. We are spending a lot of time with someone else, perhaps, or a group of people who we don't normally see so often and so regularly. So I've heard that people are even scheduling times to use particular parts of their house so as not to step on one another's toes. Yeah, home is looking a little different for a lot of us these days. Now, I'm standing right now in what a lot of us, what many of us consider to be their spiritual home, our building here on Neolopa Place and the Poly Highway. There's no one here on the first floor except for the amazing Stuart, who is making sure everyone can hear and see worship today. And we actually are joined by some of the folks who live here who are practicing wonderful social distancing as we speak. And being in this home, this spacious home, reminds me a little of growing up. See, as a child, I had a bit of a doggedness when it came to purchases of a certain size, especially purchases I wanted my parents to make for me. I'm sure I've spoken of this before, but my mother's very kind, generous way to name these little projects I have was to call them my little campaigns. I would spend not a week, not even months, but sometimes years going over ads in the newspaper. This was before eBay or any sort of online way to purchase things. So for those of you who don't know what they are, there used to be a classified section, I know there really still is, in newspapers for things you wanted to sell. And for a while, my bored little eyes were scouring the pages of the classified ads for a pool table. See, our home, as spacious as it was simply not designed with a game room or any one room that was big enough that had a place that could even fit a pool table. We literally could not fit it in the house where we lived at the time, but this reality did not matter to me. My campaign went on. And to put it in perspective, I'm not particularly proud of this. I spent less time picking a college than I did searching for a pool table. And I actually went to the college I picked, just barely though, that's another sermon, and never got the pool table. But the way it works in my life now, my campaigning in adulthood really never ended. It was just became for something different, something cute, something efficient, something very, very small. I think my most recent real campaign came when I became obsessed with tiny houses. Now, if you don't know what these are, they're usually miniature little homes that are built on trailers that can be towed around. They're usually self-contained in many respects and kind of off the grid, and they just seem so cozy and fun, like kind of a tree house you could actually live in. There was even a show called Tiny House Nation that would help people fulfill their tiny house dreams by building them tiny houses. And the hosts would do all kinds of things to prepare families to be in the tiny house together for long periods of time. My favorite exercise, the most vibrantly alive image I had, was when the hosts would tape off the total amount of floor space of a tiny house on a gym floor or on a parking lot. Then they drag all the belongings that the couple or the family needed to that spot nearby. And then they would tell them to fit the belongings in the home which seems like a pretty reasonable idea, sort of like on the staked out area. But right before the couple started doing it, they would tie the couple together at the waist with 6 feet of rope, because that was the farthest they would ever be from each other in the house. It was really entertaining watching 2 independent people try to navigate that space tied together. And I'm pretty sure that exercise, that very episode of Tiny House Nation, is what started to chip away at my enthusiasm for tiny houses. My campaign, the romance of it all, the little tree house on tires and such, fizzled out. Because all of a sudden, stuff got real. I don't know if anyone here has had an experience of late where things got real fast. And many of us are now getting to know every little nook and cranny of our homes, aren't we? A few people have said they're doing a lot of deep cleaning of their home. And others of us are getting to know a lot about the people with whom we share that home. I've been spending a lot of time on my lanai, actually, and those residents of the neighborhood with dogs are going back and forth with a lot more regularity than they used to. Some couple I even saw are running a few times a day. They're getting out of the house to go running, which seems a little excessive, but I get it. These are times that are calling us all into lives we may have never thought we would have to lead. Choosing to stay home almost all the time is not something most people who live in Hawaii ever considered they might ever do. Choosing to keep a wide berth from people in stores, on sidewalks, and all over the place we go, also not something we ever thought we'd have to do. But more than a lot of these distancing things that many are feeling, there is this invisible threat we are feeling that seems to lurk around every corner for people. The reason that people are doing this distancing, just yesterday when someone needed to pass me a little closer than they wanted to, you could feel the energy between us thinking, oh, we should move farther apart. Now, many smart people have talked about the possibility of something like this starting in our past. They've predicted numbers and outcomes of a health variety, but I don't recall a lot of predictions about what it is we would make of this new situation, of the ways we could start to react as humans having a terrifying and a novel experience like many of us are having. I have my own opinions, personally, about the trajectory of a human heart inclined toward loving kindness. I think many of us do, but nothing so real, so very, very real, has dared a real answer to that question as the time we are in now. I think we all know it's getting real out there. Friday afternoon, I received a funny invitation. I was at home, not writing my sermon, and it was an invitation to a graduation ceremony. I received this invitation and saw that it was going to happen in 3 hours, because the invitation was to a ceremony a friend was going to have for their fiance who had just graduated from nursing school, but whose ceremony for graduation was canceled for the time being. The invitation was to an online Zoom ceremony, and it was a surprise for the graduates, so we had to log in right at this specific time. So I did it. I logged in, and the graduates' entire family popped up before me. My friends from all over the country showed up, and a whole crew of us were there in the online room in what I call the Brady Bunch view, which is what I like to call when you click on the gallery view. And when my friend's fiance came back into the house after being tricked into going outside rather, expertly, they were stunned. My friend required that their fiance put on the actual cap and gown, and then they actually played Algar's Pomp and Circumstance for the procession and made my friend walk down the aisle of their home. And then my friend, who happens to be Irish, so is known to have kind of a way with words, recited a commencement address so touching and heartfelt that the fiancé asked to stop because they were about to lose it and break down in tears of joy and being touched and moved. So instead, my friends simply hugged their fiancé, and the newest member of the nursing profession entered their new future. There was not a dry eye in that Zoom room, not a one. Because this ceremony was real. It was more real in many ways than any ceremony could be. Even the graduate said so. It meant so much to have all of us there, to have a personal time of celebration. And I think this ceremony points to something many of us are starting to feel, to realize that we are learning what really, really matters to us at these times. The people in that little Zoom room were beaming at my friend finishing school and the amazing ceremony that my other friend put on. In 10 minutes, we made a memory together that will last a lifetime, that's enriching all of you as well. And the times we are in now are ripe. I tell you, they are ripe for these kinds of connections, my friends. Never really have we longed for the presence of our loved ones quite in the way we are now. Never really have we yearned for being together with our communities quite in the way we are now. And never really have we ached with the sense of what is coming to our communities quite in the way we are now. I dare say, in some ways, we have never been so much a church as we are right now. It is getting real, my friends, and we are here for each other. And when things get real, I like to remember that the home where I am standing now was built by a direct ancestor of the colonists, of the Puritans, of the Pilgrims who went to Connecticut in the early part of the 17th century, and it was one of their leaders, John Winthrop, future governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, who called upon those colonists in 1630 to be the city on the hill. In his famous sermon called A Model of Christian Charity, he gave before departing from England for the Massachusetts Bay Colony, Winthrop hoped that the ways that the colonists would live would be as bright as a shining light of example to all those who surrounded them. History would say they hoped that these colonists, as well as the colonists on this very island, would do well. And in fact, those descendants did build this very house. But I dare say our ancestors did not live into all the meaning of loving thy neighbor. They did not find the compassion, the justice, or the joy that we today strive for. They found their neighbors living on this island, on the land they wanted, living in the mainland, on the continent, on the land they wanted, and did what they did. And yet, somehow, throughout the history of the American political system, politicians still adopt this image, the city on the hill for a nation. This nation, so many call home, hoping, saying, it is a shining example to the world. But all of these references to a city on the hill, my friends, they date back, far back, to one of the great moral teachings in the Western world, the Sermon on the Mount. That's when Jesus of Nazareth tells his followers, first, you are the light of the world. Then, he says, a city built on a hill cannot be hid. Later, people tried to put these ideas together, but we have to look at what's really said. Jesus was not speaking to a nation then. He was speaking to a group of individuals whom together formed what? A tiny little church. These few individuals gathered wherever they could, by a river often, on a mountain, in the homes of some of their wealthy patrons, to learn how to be the light of the world. And like happens far too often, from this deeply individual, deeply spiritual, and deeply personal call to be a light unto the world, empire and empty conquering forged a path of prosperity that hoped to turn a city, a nation, into the envy of the world, the very idol of prosperity, but they got the message wrong. They forgot the second line and what is really said, that a city, a home on a hill, cannot be hid. In a time when the city on the hill of so much fame has failed, in many ways so significantly, so robustly, so resolutely, to prepare for what the world awakened to months ago, we look instead rather to what is the real light of the world. We here, in this room, have built something together from this home on a hill that will not be hid, my friends. More and more, the signs of compassion rooted here, the cries for justice growing here, and the hopes of joy blossoming in here are now in each one of your own hearts, each one of your own homes, as small and as crowded as those homes may feel or seem, but rooted in compassion, growing in justice, and hoping for joy. You are each the church now. Spread across a city, across islands, across oceans, you are the real light in these times, and it will not be hid, should not be hid, cannot be hid from this hurting world. As a child might prepare for something seemingly impossible, launching on a campaign of unreasoning hope, so we now launch on a campaign of care, a campaign of concern for one another, for our community, and for building the beloved community outside the walls of this building, outside the walls of our hearts, in a world that seems to tumble now in ways it has never been before. It is time to consider what is real in the connections we have between one another. It is time to consider what is real in the ways we transform a legacy of injustice by our spiritual ancestors into the wealth of justice for our spiritual descendants. It is time to consider what is real in the beloved community we strive every day, every hour, every minute, if that's what it takes to build here on this earth. This campaign is only just beginning, my beloveds. We are all graduating together today into a new way of being together. We may be lights of compassion. May we be lights of compassion, justice, and joy in a hurting world. And though we are sheltered here in place, let us never forget, it's getting real now. And we will not, we must not, we cannot be hid. And may it ever be so. Blessed be, and amen.